All right, Bob, last week the DEA published a final rule in the Federal Register. Can you tell us what that rule is?
Yeah, so the rule that was deemed the final rule and published in the Federal Register by the DEA surrounds a new category for drug classification called marijuana extract. And there's codes for all sorts of controlled substances. And the reason behind those code numbers, it's typically a 4-digit code number, and the reason for that is if you're a DEA registrant, whether you're a physician or a doctor or a researcher or a government agency, there's a number of reasons why someone would be a DEA registrant. And they need to acquire, purchase, combine drugs. You would use these drug codes administratively to indicate which substances you're using. So this new code came out with the title marijuana extract. And it was pretty alarming to a lot of people when they saw it.
And what do you think the potential impact of this rule is?
That's a good question. I mean, it remains to be seen, but at the end of the day, as I've said many times, the sky's not falling. This is not like the DEA came out and scheduled something, but it's not a mere administrative act either. The implications for creating a new drug code for the category marijuana extract are far-ranging and sometimes somewhat unpredictable. For example, if you have agencies, federal agencies, the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, Customs and Border Patrol, USDA, state equivalents of these agencies that look to those drug codes and they say if it's got a drug code and it's in the drug code book, the orange book they call it, then it must be a controlled substance. So when you have agencies doing that, what if we're trying to import or export something? What if we're trying to get approval from the FDA or the USDA for a particular product and that agency says, this is marijuana extract, even if it came from hemp or some sort of other lawful plant or lawful part of the plant, it's concerning how those codes will be used outside of what they're technically meant to be used, because we see that in practice all the time. Does that make sense?
Makes sense. So what are you telling your clients, and what do you see as the potential response to this?
So we've got to try to keep the lines of communication open. We've got to talk with the folks in different government agencies, not the least of which is the DEA. Try to keep those doors open. Try some sort of diplomatic effort. Try to work with congresspeople to see if this is something that concerns them, and try to get them to send a letter or act on the industry's behalf. When I talk about the industry, by the way, really just thinking about the industry, the cannabis industry generally, but industrial hemp, because it's got such a tremendous upside and can solve so many of the world's problems and can help so many people. But that's really the industry that could be impacted by this. So what can we do? We could certainly look at a lawsuit. You could challenge the rule, challenge whether the rule is authorized. There's a number of different ways to go at it, and we're looking at those different ways. But in the first instance, you have to think, at least give it a try, that reason will prevail. Do you think reason could prevail in this case?
Well, I actually don't have a lot of hope for that. I'm usually an optimistic guy, but I've seen the DEA do this before. Back in the early 2000s, the DEA was pushing a policy that started from the Office of National Drug Control Policy, trying to ban hemp foods. And at that point, no reasonableness prevailed in telling them that hemp was not a drug. And what they felt truly was that hemp pipe was, somehow a stalking horse for marijuana, and therefore it needed to be stopped. So the industry pushed back. They challenged it forcefully straight into the Ninth Circuit, and they defeated them. So we have a track record. The industry does have a track record for taking them on. But I do hope, as someone who is a diplomat, believes in dispute resolution and mediation, the art of compromise and working together. But make no mistake, I don't think this is an issue for compromise. The battle lines are being fought here between cannabinoids, cannabis in general, being pushed into the realm of the FDA, and pharmaceutical industry, and we need to make sure that the natural products industry also has a place for having a large part of the market. And this is a revenues issue. This is a jobs issue. And if the DEA had their way on this issue, they would be putting a lot of people out of business.
That was, I think, the most alarming thing that I saw is when I read the definition for the first time, marijuana extract, and it said, what was it? Any extracted oil that contains any cannabinoids, period, as long as it comes from any part of the cannabis sativa L plant. Isn't that in effect what the rule said? I'm just
that is.
So the idea that cannabinoids themselves are somehow a controlled substance or a regulated substance, that's the confusing part, because that's not what the schedule says. Cannabinoids are not a controlled substance per se. They can be if they come from certain parts of the plant or certain plants, but cannabinoids come from other plants. They come from industrial hemp plants that are domestically produced that have the protections of the Farm Bill.
And they come from the exempt parts of the plant that come from the definition of marijuana.
Mm-hmm.
And this is an attempt to put, from our opinion, put into Schedule 1 a substance that's non-psychotropic, has been shown to have medical benefit, as well as have no possible opportunity for addiction. So it makes absolutely no sense.
And when the rest of the world is going all in on cannabinoid extracts and CBD, Latin American nationalized healthcare systems, for heaven's sakes, they're looking at this and they're putting them into their programs, and we're trying to roll back this. Is it to hand it over to a pharmaceutical play? Don't you think that there is a situation where both can exist side by side, where you can have cannabis-based medicine, whether it's cannabinoids, THC, as a particular cannabis, whatever the case might be, cannabis-based medicine, pharmaceutical, regulated by the federal government, line in the sand, nutraceutical, right? Natural products, natural state flowers, oils, extracts, hemp or marijuana. Can't those two exist simultaneously?
Absolutely. How about another analogy? How about agriculture in general? You have the conventional world and you have the organics.
Mm-hmm.
It seems similar.
It does. It does. So yeah, no, it's definitely concerning. What do you think the potential repercussions are of this rule if it just was let to stand?
My concern is not necessarily some mass form of criminal prosecution, but it is a continuation of a campaign that the DEA has undertaken to control all things cannabis. And they know that they're on life support in a certain sense when it comes to marijuana being a controlled one substance. And the more they are able to maintain control of, maybe it's not the entire plant, maybe it's just part of the plant, they're able to push out their relevance, their existence, and their call for revenues. So if left unchecked, cannabinoids, all natural cannabinoids are going on to Schedule 1, where they absolutely need rulemaking, in our opinion, my opinion. And it's part of the battle that the FDA is engaged in with attempting to stop CBD from being marketed as a dietary supplement in coordination with the IND coming out of GW Pharmaceutical. These are, I feel, tied in together intricately, and we have to take a step back when we analyze this situation and look at it from the big picture as opposed to just the single action.
Right. And at a minimum, you can't just disregard it and say that this is just some sort of administrative coding function when the rule itself states a false premise, that cannabinoids are somehow a scheduled substance.
Had we disregarded the rule that DEA tried to issue in 2000, we wouldn't be sitting here today talking about hemp.
That's a great point, Patrick. That's a great point. Yeah, so we'll see. We'll see what happens next, what the next move is.
Yeah.
David, you got anything you want to add to the mix?
I'm trying to find a question you didn't answer. You guys covered code. Okay, so stores and was divided into two categories. Small like health food stores or whatever in medical marijuana states and non-medical marijuana states. Should they be scrambling to get CBD off their shelves?
Yeah, please. First and foremost, I would say you have 30 days for this new rule to take effect. So as we stand here today, the rule doesn't take effect. And there would have to be a shift in enforcement policy by the DEA or any Department of Justice entity for that to be a concern in the next 30 days. Second thing we have going for us is if it's domestically produced, we still have an extension of the omnibus bill or the Rawbacker-Farr amendment, combined by resolution that goes through April. So that basically cuts out the law enforcement possibilities in a lot of respects surrounding this plant. But the practical implications are imports and exports and people trying to conduct business and having these codes thrown back at them and say, that's an illegal substance, that's a scheduled substance because it has a code. And that's not right, that's not accurate. So that's something that should interrupt commerce in the short term, but I don't think in the next 30 days. As far as I'm concerned, it's understanding the law, building your business plan around what the law allows, and standing by those legal principles. Because at the end of the day, an agency can believe what it wants. It can shift and create whatever policies it wants. But when we're talking about reality, the rubber meets the road in what the law says. And what the law allows is the scheduling of marijuana with some parts of the plant that are not considered marijuana as a Schedule I substance, and it allows THC to be identified as a scheduled substance, although the Ninth Circuit case indicated that that might only refer to synthetic THC. Other than that, cannabinoids are fair game unless they violate those laws, and that's something I think that people need to understand and build their business plans accordingly.
There's been a lot of rumor and on the internet for months and months.
There was one thing. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
There was one thing I just wanted to add to that was that just to make sure that to monitor the situation and keep abreast of developments as well as know what the laws are in your particular state, because there are CBD only laws states, and it's important to know what the laws are both at the national level, the state level, and the local level.
Right. Yeah, that definitely. So there's been a lot of rumor. You probably heard it, and I'm sure most likely it's not more than rumor that there will be a plan to deschedule to Schedule II THC and cannabinoids. So, and some people think that would be giving that business to the pharmaceutical companies, which we see happening in parts of Europe right now. So, if that's the case, maybe this is just a tactical maneuver to include other cannabinoids in that descheduled Schedule II and give it to the pharmaceuticals. Now, that's a pretty good stretch of the imagination, but I'm just trying to make logic out of what they're doing here.
I mean, first of all, I don't think that DEA has any plan to reschedule. They could have rescheduled early in August, and they chose not to reschedule. They continue to stick their head in the sand. I don't think they do it as if they don't know what they're doing. It goes back to the maintenance of their relevance and their budget. I agree that cannabis needs to be descheduled. the rescheduling of cannabis maintains it with it. What maybe we can. It's less restrictive, but keeping it on the schedule does nothing to encourage the development and cannabis going the way of the natural products industry. It's going to maintain it within the pharmaceutical industry as far as I can tell. And I mean, you may have further thoughts.
No,
on that.
I don't disagree with any of that. I think is there a connection, as you described, between the Federal Register issue, the new rule, and potential rescheduling? These are not unintelligent people on that side figuring these things out. So it wouldn't be beyond the realm of possibilities. But when it comes down to it, it's rescheduling would be necessary for the pharmaceutical side, right? Reschedule it so that there can be drug development and research, and they can create compounds that largely are synthetic mimics of the natural cannabinoids, or certainly they can include natural cannabinoids. But then the nutraceutical side would require some sort of descheduling, like a codification and adoption by statute of something like the Ogden Memo, for example. Something that says if states want this and they vote for it, or their people vote for it, and they have a robust regulatory structure in place, then they can use this plant and have this plant, and that doesn't count as a violation of the Controlled Substances Act. In that case, it's descheduled. I think that both can exist simultaneously because that also caters to different markets. Some people want to use pharmaceutical company-derived products. Some people want to try products in their natural format, processed in some form or fashion. I think both can exist side by side, and that's how I see it developing.
But with it remaining as Schedule 2?
Schedule 2 on the pharma side, carve out on the other side. The way you define the difference is it's very likely that the pharmaceutical compounds are synthetic, although the FDA rules would not require that they be synthetic. So that would be an easy line in the sand. Synthetic cannabinoids
or
isolates count as a FDA approved drug, regulated, rescheduled. If it's a natural substance, then it's on the nutraceutical side. The over-the-counter marijuana and the hemp industry side, state and local regulated, right? If there's probably another potency divide in there as well. For example, if you look at red yeast rice, it is the basis for pharmaceutical compounds that treat cholesterol, as I understand it, statin. There's a divide between what makes one a pharmaceutical and the patents associated with it, and one that makes this other thing a dietary supplement or a nutritional product, food, nutraceutical. What's that divide as it applies there, and use that as an analogy with people that can define the science better than I can articulate it, to say here's the divide, here's the line in the sand, here's one side and here's the other. I see that working. I see that as possible. So rescheduling on the one side, descheduling on the other, with a definition that clearly defines the distinction between the two based on potency or synthetic versus natural.
Good. Would you recommend people taking action? I've seen today a petition come out on We the People, although they're generally not so effective, but in some way people doing something, or even just passive resistance and saying no, it's my right to consume natural products which my body needs, and I'm not going to let a bureaucratic department of the government decide that for me. It's my human right.
Are you talking about people in states that have not passed cannabis law?
I'm talking about,
or anybody.
I'm talking about the tens and hundreds of thousands of people out there who need CBD, for example, to help them with their lives and their health, for neurological disorders and all the many things which it's helping, which people are buying it for. It's helping them. Are people again going to start moving to Colorado because in their state they can't purchase CBD for their child who has epilepsy? Is that where it's going? And what's your what do you want to say to these people? What should they do? Like, what is their risk? I mean, when people think of DEA, they see the guys in masks and guns kicking down the door and, you know, arresting and violating all their human rights. So, you know, so the mother, right, who's giving her child CBD successfully, that lives in Oklahoma or wherever, you know, what is this considered on the same level as Schedule 1 as cocaine or heroin, right? I mean, and that's what people are asking is what's
So I go back to know the law in your state. Number one, you work with your congressional elected officials, being in communication with them and making particular demands. And at the end of the day, you do what you got to do to find as legal a source as possible the medicine that you need for you and your family. And I don't believe, like, one of the DEA has taken the position that CBD has been controlled and on the list for a number of years, and they have not been enforcing it. So our feeling was, well, so what they're saying it's illegal, but they're not enforcing it. So maybe this isn't an issue that they are going to fight out in the court of public opinion. And until they start enforcing against people in possession, which I don't think they will do, these folks have to do what is right and best for the health of their family. And I don't see any examples of actual patients being targeted. It's the companies that are providing the medicine.
Yeah, no, the fact of the matter is that makes an interesting case. I mean, we talked about that. Is the DEA or any federal agency willing to put that on the line, where there's these children of all people, children, and not to mention, you know, so many other people that aren't children that get relief from using this product. You're going to put that out there and deny these people access to something that's really making a difference, when in reality, it would take years of study to show that somehow pharmaceutical-based drugs could replace this, and I think we all know the answer, that you can't replace the natural cannabinoids and the profile of the plant itself with some sort of pharmaceutical drug. But I think that nobody should put these children and other people in a situation where they can't have access to their medicine, simply waiting to have that determined whether or not this actually doesn't work or doesn't. I mean, it's a catch-22 when it comes down to it, and I don't see. That would be a bold move. It'd be a bold move if the federal government came out and tried to shut down access to people. But going after the companies would appear safe now. But I think that the danger is they don't realize how many companies there are, how well funded they are. The numbers are not certain, but they estimate that it's a $1 billion U.S. industry for cannabinoid extracts. That's just that right now. That would say that there's a lot of businesses out there doing it, and a lot of people spending money to access things that don't get you high, don't have a psychoactive effect, and actually improve your life. There'd be a lot of pushback on that.
Okay, so you know, both of you are very well known and respected in the industry. I could say safely, most people would agree that the two top lawyers in the cannabis industry, and you represent a lot of people in the industry. And so, on behalf of the people who you represent in the industry, could you please make a statement to the DEA and to the incumbent president regarding this?
Well, I'd start by saying, you know, at the end of the day, there is a way. Cannabis policy in the United States is very clear. It's along the divide of what I talked about earlier. It's a rescheduled FDA cannabis plant-based medicine on one side. This is pharma. Line in the sand, nutraceutical, natural product, over-the-counter marijuana, whether that's for medicinal or recreational use, or frankly, if it's hemp-derived products for human consumption, on the other side. There is a way to allow that policy to develop on mutual tracks, to not interfere with one another, to allow to capture the most, speaking to the administration, to capture the most revenue, to respect the state's rights and the individual freedoms that are appropriate here. You can do that, and you can do that very, very well and very, very easily, which is simply codifying some things that already exist today. That would be my message. And in terms of an enforcement pattern, to the DEA, the Congress has spoken loud and clear that they don't want the DEA using its dollars against marijuana, which means industrial hemp or any form of the cannabis plant. So stop doing it. Let other agencies regulate the plant appropriately at the state and federal level, whether it's medicine or whether it's our dispensary system in a bunch of different states. This isn't for the DEA anymore. That's the momentum. That's the election day momentum. That's the momentum in terms of enforcement policy that the U.S. has stood up and said, this is how we want it. Across the board, Republican and Democrat, it doesn't matter. And that's what they need to pay attention to. And just look what's happening around the world, because every other country is doing, is far more advanced in thinking about how to regulate this plant and its related marketplace. So that would be my message.
Yeah, and just to add to that, to think long and hard about the fact that you're a single branch of the government and that your policy may not be well received by Congress or the courts. So let's engage in dialogue and diplomacy and work together to craft an intelligent policy on cannabis and cannabinoids and industrial hemp, or be careful with fighting a battle against a strong majority of the country.
Well said. The USDA needs to treat hemp, industrial hemp, just like any other crop, because that's all it is. It's a crop that has many, many uses. One of those uses is for human consumption, whether that's food or dietary supplements or the like. And that's something we'll talk about in a moment, because the FDA also needs to treat anything that comes from this plant, so long as it doesn't have a psychoactive impact or psychoactive effect. It needs to treat it like any other food or supplement product. So you can't look at this product and say, because it may or may not have been a controlled substance or come from a cannabis plant, legal or not, because there's a variety of ways it could be legal or not be a legal cannabis plant. It should not be put in the same boat as if it's some sort of poison or deleterious substance or an adulterant. It shouldn't be put in that category. It should be treated like a food product, so long as that THC level is de minimis in that 0.3 or percent range or below. So you need to allow the plant to be used for those purposes, whether it's oils for a variety of purposes, whether it's eating the leaves, whether it's juicing, whether it's the seeds and the proteins and the hemp hearts, whether it's using the roots for topicals or cosmetics. The FDA has its purview over a number of these things, and it just needs to be looked at as if it's not an adverse thing to society, because it's not an adverse thing to society. It's something that's no different when you have that THC level at the appropriate amount. It's no different than any other plant or food product, except that it does have cannabinoids which interact with the human body in a positive way. Not in a psychoactive way, but a positive way. And that alone shouldn't give these agencies some sort of trepidation that it needs to be treated differently because it has cannabinoids in it. Fish oil has omega-3s in it. These are things. I mean, look at so forth down the line in terms of nutraceutical products and natural products. And these subcomponents of what make the plant up do not define what the plant is.
Let me ask you this: how does grass status play into this? The generally recognized as safe.
So typically, if a food product is not a traditional dietary ingredient or not registered as a new dietary ingredient, it would have to go through this GRAS process, generally recognized as safe, to determine that this product does in fact not harm the human body. There's a number of people that have this process underway as it pertains to the hemp plant and various derivatives of the hemp plant to show that this is safe for human consumption, that it's not going to, A, get you high, it's not going to adversely affect your health or your body, and it actually may even benefit it from a nutritional perspective. That's part of the analysis, and it's a lengthy and somewhat costly process. But if this plant or certain derivatives from the plant were to achieve GRAS status through a report that was self-affirmed and published in a well-respected peer-reviewed journal, then you would effectively be establishing that products from this plant intended for human consumption are in fact safe, don't have an adverse impact on you, and certainly don't have a psychoactive or psychotropic effect.
So would that be enough to overcome this FDA assertion that it's an adulterant?
It should, but part of the problem is that the FDA either recognizes your GRAS study or not, and that seems a little bit too arbitrary to me.
Okay, so there's that other branch of the judicial system.
There is the judiciary out there in that event,
Okay.
but there's certainly more to the story and much more nuance and detail with all of those things. But that's the broad strokes of it. But one of the what I call the low-hanging fruit as it pertains to industrial hemp is animal feed, grain products, feeds. I mean, this is something that they've been for 70 plus years in European countries outside of the U.S. They've perfected this as a protein additive, as a nutritional supplement, as the basis for grain. I mean, that's pretty exciting stuff, and that's something that we also see is interrupted by the FDA's position oftentimes on whether this plant is an adulterant or not. So.